This week on Dig Me Out.
Fight for us, one-eyed cross. He was right, not lost. Wall said, the price of death. You must believe he couldn't die.
With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, it's a union show, union time.
Who we got? What's up?
Returning to the podcast, you might remember him from such episodes as Royal Trucks, Cats and Dogs, Rides Nowhere, Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, as well as our Soundgarden in the 80s roundtable. Welcome back to the show, Rudy Stoll. Rudy, how are you?
Doing awesome. Great to be back on with you guys. Thank you. Show's still great. Listen to it almost every day. Well,
Awesome.
every day it's out.
Yes. We can't do it every day. We would, but they don't pay us enough. We'd be on here like Regis and Kathy Lee. Well, they're not on the show. They're not on TV anymore, are they?
Do a morning show.
Good morning. It's time for your 90s rock.
And we're all showing our age, Regis and Kathy Lee, right?
Yeah.
We just lost the under 40 demo.
It's like Charlie Gibson and who was with him? I don't even remember. So like I mentioned, Royal Trucks, Ride, Soundgarden. 3 picks, not really close to each other. You've thrown us a curveball each time. So on this one, this wasn't even this was like a knuckleball with grease on it that you threw at us. This was a Tim Wakefield floater.
There's a little junk on this pitch.
There was some junk. We're doing a compilation. Can you share with the audience the compilation that you picked?
Yep, it came from Slimey Valley, and I thank you guys for indulging me in dipping out of the 90s and going back to the 80s, but this album was seminal in my getting into punk, and then probably obviously from there getting into grunge and everything after that. This is right down the road for me. It's what they called nardcore. It was a style of punk that was heavy into skating and surfing. It was fast, it was fun, it was younger people. I was about 19 when I got into it, and I was an old guy, to be honest with you. It was just it was an eye-opener, and it was so much fun. And I've got a couple of stories about how I got into it, but I just want to share it with everybody because it's an album 40 years later. Well, that's another thing. It's an anniversary. So it was 40 years ago I got this album when I was 19. So that would make me almost 60. So again, thank you for indulging me.
So this is sort of like an unofficial Origins episode. We've done Origins on Soundgarden and some other bands from the 80s, Dinosaur Jr. being another one. This is sort of an origin of, I guess, the SoCal punk sound that would explode in the 90s. And I did a lot of research on this. I went through each band, looking up who was in the band, trying to connect them to artists, finding information on the label. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. I'm going to bet all of my money, Jay, that you have never heard of any of these bands. I'm pushing it in to
You're all in
the table. Were you a big fan of Crankshaft or Mox Nix?
I think you got me on this hand.
So I have to ask you one question, Rudy. So you said you got it when it came out. So did you get on vinyl? Is that what it was originally released on?
Yep, I bought it at a gig. They were selling them. I think the guy wanted $5 for it, and I gave him 4 for it. And I think it was on green vinyl, or that, or I got it on green vinyl later. But they were selling them at the show.
So they re-released this in 2020 on cassette. And you can go to Bandcamp and listen to that. And on that version, they included 2 extra songs. I don't know if you're aware of that. So, Jay, which version did you listen to? The 16-track version? I'm assuming that's on Spotify and Amazon Music and all those places.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's the original release. So we'll talk about that.
Okay.
One. and we'll have to leave aggression and Weekaton days to another. Maybe they'll come up naturally in another episode. I don't know, but those were the two bonus bands that were included on the digital version on Bandcamp, which you can still go and stream. The cassette sold out. They only made like 100 copies of the cassette back in 2020. So this was released originally on a label called Getaway Records, which was a subsidiary, I guess, of Mystic Records. Do you know anything about these labels, Rudy, at all?
Just that Mystic was the label that most of the punk bands went to. I honestly don't know if they were a subsidiary. I think they're independent, but I know that Getaway was a subsidiary of Mystic. Mystic was pretty well known around here. A lot of kids wore Mystic Records t-shirts, and they would host gigs. They would be the promoter for certain gigs and stuff. So they were fairly well known, kind of an underground label. I believe they're still around.
Yeah. So here's the crazy thing. There's again stuff going on. They didn't start out as a punk label. It started out in 1976 by a guy named Doug Moody. Who's Doug Moody, you ask? Doug Moody is a producer engineer that was born in the UK. His dad was Walter Moody. Walter Moody was the owner of a label called Emmett and the Emmett Music Corporation publishing company in the UK. He also managed EMI Studios in the 1930s, which later became Abbey Road Studios. So there's a lineage of this family being in the music business. The Moody's helped basically bring the Beatles were part of like the process of bringing the Beatles to the United States in the early 1960s. And so he starts this label Mystic in the mid 70s, and they're putting out, like, when I'm looking at the bands that they're putting out, it's like I said, it's not punk. It takes a little bit for, I guess, them to get into the punk stuff. And you have stuff from, I mean, there's over 250 releases on this label, but they have like early NoFX, like stuff like that. Like there's a lot of bands that Battalion of Saints, which is another band that is people might know from that scene. A lot of stuff, just nonstop, year after year after year, punk and hardcore and Dr. No. Now, Dr. No is important. They're on this comp twice. Dr. No is a band from so nardcore comes from the Oxnard area.
Dr. No is from Oxnard. A lot of these bands aren't, but Dr. No was from Oxnard.
Right.
Or he is from Oxnard.
The lead singer of was Brandon Cruz. Jay, do you know who Brandon Cruz was by chance?
No.
Brandon Cruz was the son on the TV show The Courtship of Eddie's Father, starring Bill Bixby from 1969 to 1972.
Okay.
Brandon Cruz was the kid actor. After he did that show for 3-4 years, he went on. He was on guest appearances on shows like Gunsmoke, Kung Fu, The Incredible Hulk, which Bill Bixby was the lead on The Incredible Hulk, and he was in the Bad News Bears. He's one of the kids on the team.
No shit.
But he got into punk rock in the 70s, and he ended up playing with Dr. No. Like, is still playing with Dr. No. They're still an active band and touring, and he was the lead singer of the Dead Kennedys for a couple years. Child actor. He's
not the two songs on this album he's not singing on. He left Dr. No after about a year. I saw Dr. No several times. I never saw him with Brandon, but that was always kind of their entree into things. Is like, oh, the kid from Courtship of Eddie's Father is the lead singer.
Right.
But then he came back to the band. I believe they recently have toured with him. I saw a video. Yep. He got old like I did.
Happens.
And he said that, being a child actor, a lot of those kids end up going down really bad paths and that punk rock basically saved his life. Punk rock and surfing were the things that saved his life to make sure he didn't go down the wrong path and he stayed the straight and narrow. So we'll get into all these bands on this label, or I mean, on this comp. It Came From Slimey Valley. Is that supposed to be a play on Simi Valley?
It is, and I'm not. It's funny because Oxnard's on the coast. It's not in Simi Valley. The Simi Valley is not even that prominent of a valley. I think they just liked the name of it. There was a few bands that did actually come out of Simi. There is a city of Simi Valley, but a lot of this is, it's funny, they call it nardcore, which is a play on words from hardcore in Oxnard.
Right.
But Oxnard's not in Simi Valley. It gets into some vagary California stuff. I know everybody lumps Southern California together, but it's significantly different than Los Angeles.
Right. And there, if you go to the Wikipedia page for punk rock in California, there's a whole section on nardcore and how it's separate from the Los Angeles sound. And a number of the bands that are on this comp are mentioned in there as being like the early nardcore bands, and how much the skate scene played into this whole thing, which I was never into that. Were you, Jay? Were you ever, do you ever have bored?
I was into skating. I was terrible at it, but you have to remember, like, I'm getting into it in Ohio. So like
Right.
the culture and the skate culture in California is not the skate culture in Ohio. Like everything is getting to Ohio like 3 years later. So yes, I had a skateboard. The graphics were, kind of cool, but I bought it at Kmart and it wasn't exactly the same thing.
Gotcha. We put this over on Patreon for folks to check out. Gavin had this to say. He said, happy to have found this. I was always a fan of punk rock samplers, and there's some good stuff here. Worthy album. We'll share the poll results for the entire for the compilation at the end with our ratings, but
well, I didn't expect to get overwhelmed with comments on it, but this, like I said, this is an indulgent for me. This is my 60th birthday present to myself.
Well, Jay, why don't you tell me one thing you liked about It Came From Slimey Valley compilation?
The first thing that jumped out to me as I got through the record was this sounds like it was ripped from vinyl, at least the version on Apple Music. You can hear some needle drops, and some of the tracks take a minute to start. There's even a skip in I think track 5 during a drum fill. And it actually adds overall to the experience. Like you really feel like you're putting on a grungy old record, and it kind of equalizes everything too. Like it makes everybody kind of sound similar, even though as you spend more time with it, you can hear some of the nuance and like the drum sounds and whatnot. But like at a first couple listens at face value, it makes it all cohesive in an unusual way that I would never have recommended somebody do, but it works for the style of music. And the fact that this is sort of it feels like an artifact you kind of dug out of the ground for, and are discovering. And I think that fact that it was ripped from vinyl really adds to that quite a bit. So that was one thing I really liked out of the gate. I'm going to hit on some of the songs that stood out to me, and just kind of highlight what I like about them. So track 1, Dr. No's Boy's Life. I really like in that, anytime the vocals in this style of music are, offsetting the guitar and the rhythm, my ears perk up because anytime it's locked together, I'm sort of wanting to hear some diversity. So in this case, I like how the vocal it's falling behind and kind of sitting in the pocket. And then in the chorus, it jumps up front and sort of pulls you into the energy. There's some cool drum dynamics going on there too, even though it's, very relentless drumming. You can still hear technically there's a lot going on that's pretty cool. And there's pretty good sense of melody on that song. Then the two Flower Leopard songs really stand out. First one, Preacher's Confession, and the second one, Death of Two Lovers. So Preacher's Confession, it's got a bass line in it that builds, it's just not three chords that hit you in the face. There's a little bit of build in the song. The guitars are really on the backbeat of that song too, which I like. That gives it, it's got some obviously rapid fire intensity to it. It's in the pocket. There's a backbeat feel to it. I think that they do a really good job of delivering that hook too. It's one of the first songs on the record where you're like, okay, they get what the hook is out of the song, even though it's a punk song. They're trying to get the get off your knees, I'm not your god. They're working at it in every couple lines, which is really effective in pulling you in and getting you involved in the tune. Then there's the pause and sort of the rebuild of the song, and then the rant at the end, sort of delivering everything the preacher's heard, like spilling it all back out again, which is pretty high intensity moment too, and it's dynamically different than a lot of the other stuff on the record. It's a tough listen subject matter wise, at least over and over again, but I think it works pretty well. The other Flower Leopard song, Death of Two Lovers. That one really, it's got a cool drum intro. It's got a distinctive guitar lead. The vocal in that is pretty different than the other song too. It's got like a Paul Di'Anno meets Glenn Danzig thing going on. He's crooning a little bit there. He's getting into like a lower register. You don't hear some of the other vocals on this doing. It's got a really hooky chorus. Some woo-woos in there. Some gang vocals to bring you in, and then it switches at the end again. It seems to be a thing with this band where they sort of have endings that are different than the rest of the song, and it turns into like this soul, like Jay Giles thing. It's really unusual, but pretty fun. I like the False Confessions Prophecy. Got some cut drums in there. It's got a cool bending guitar riff. I like another big standout is Slaughterhouse 5, Second Generation. That one feels like probably from a production, like obviously you get the vinyl over the top, so it kind of tones it down. But if you really listen, like the drum sound on that is different than the other songs. Like it's beefier, it's bigger. It's got a really good groove. The chorus is pretty hooky. It almost sounds like more of like a New York punk band. I was thinking of like the Dictators or something. It doesn't really sound like the rest of this record very much. I can get sort of the Southern California feel from what's going on. This one feels different to me. Like it sounds like a different style band altogether, even though it fits on the compilation. And it's got maybe the biggest chorus on the record too. Really interesting song. The last one that really stood out to me was Ring of Terror, Violent Children. Really cool gallop on the drums. The riff is almost like a stoner metal. You can kind of hear like this proto stoner metal guitar riff going on with a gang vocal. It's got some dynamic guitar stuff going on that locks up the drums. There's a really cool guitar run in that song too. That's pretty unusual for this style of music. It's almost like prog metal meets garage punk. It's got these little elements to it. You're like, oh, that kind of sounds like a metal band, but not like, it's like rawer and less produced and like perfect. It's got like a spontaneity to it and a unpolished sense to it that makes it a little bit different. So that's some of the stuff that stood out to me that grabbed my ear. What worked for you, Tim?
Well, I agree with you on your last two picks. Reign of Terrors, Violent Children, and Slaughterhouse 5's Second Generation are like the ones that had the best hook that I remembered going back after multiple listens. Oh, that's that song. And both of them being a little bit slower and not sounding like the rest of the record. Although what I thought was interesting is like you would hear parts and you'd go, huh, that intro, that kind of sounds like something Mudhoney would do, like on Crankshaft's Army of the Dead. The beginning almost sounds like a Mudhoney, broken blues kind of thing that's happening. And you hear like on that Rigor Mortis song In the Trenches, it has like a fuzzier guitar tone. Like you mentioned about the stoner rock sound. He's also on that song, the singer is singing deeper, which was interesting because there's a lot of, a lot of the songs feature someone over, a 200 beats per minute drum part and just they're screaming over top of it, which you kind of have to do. So when you have someone that actually has like a big booming voice, it can add a really nice compliment to or change a pace.
You can before you leave that song, you can definitely like imagine that guitar tone and style of riff. If you slowed that down, it's kind of the prototype for Caius. Like it's very much in that space.
Yes.
What we're talking is eternity. All your problems will be free. Say goodbye to society. Some people falling for the free. No need to panic. It will better work. We'll all fucking now. Cause of a couple of shirts. Reagan wants it all. Russia's not just had enough. No one is victorious. Not us. Not them. No one. What we're talking is eternity. All your problems will be free. Say goodbye to society. Some people call it world agree. No need to panic. It won't have to work.
Now you mentioned the Flower Leperds, Death of Two Lovers. When I heard the whoa, whoa, whoa part in that, I was like, Misfits. Like I could hear them being into the Misfits, even though Misfits for a Jersey band. By 1984, I'm sure the punk underground had filtered the Misfits out to the West Coast, and they were aware of that. Not to say that they ripped them off or anything, but just like that idea of those gang vocals was, something that was kind of a part of this. Now, and Rudy, you can talk about this maybe a little bit more, but there were some of these bands were described as horror punk, which I'm guessing that's what the Misfits would be referred to because of their imagery that they used. Was that part of the nardcore scene, the horror punk stuff?
Not really. And the Flower Leopards were kind of gothy, horror-ish. The song, it's one of the things when I suggested this album, I said to you that the Preacher's Confession is not safe for work and offensive, especially by today's standards. It's kind of unnecessary. I know it was 1984 and they were just trying to be shocking. I know that in concert, he would put on plastic hair and a preacher's collar and just be as obscene as he possibly could through it. And it was punk rock. It was out there to be offensive. So they were a little more theatrical than a lot of these other bands.
Okay.
Definitely. And you guys have hit on but I think musically the Flower Leopards, their guitars and stuff, and I'm stoked that you guys hit on it. Death of Two Lovers, man, that's a jam. That song, that's one that sticks in your head. That is great. It's got that great riff in it. And what I loved about it when I got into punk in general and this genre, which was right down the road from me where I grew up, is they didn't overdo it. I mean, they would have a great hook, but they didn't drive it into the ground. There wasn't the endless guitar noodling. It's like, oh, you've got these great hooks. They always left you. So it was like you're waiting for more. It's like, oh man, I could use some more of that. It was so good. And like I said in my email to you, I think a lot of what happened, because in '84, you weren't recording things on your iPhone, obviously. You had to get studio time to do things. And I know just anecdotally from talking to people and being around the scene, that some of these major studios, they would book time in their downtime when they could get it cheaper, but they still had the same recording guys. And back when you had 1,000 dials to make things work, so they were getting some pretty professional mixes for a bunch of kids in a punk band.
So, you talked a little bit about the Flower Leopards, Death of Two Lovers. What other songs on here work best for you?
Well, I've always been a huge Dr. No fan. In fact, my avatar around here is the Dr. No logo. People think it's some type of gaming thing or anything, but it's always been the Dr. No logo. I've just always loved Dr. No. I think they're still around. They play occasionally down in San Diego. I saw them not too long ago. But those first three songs, so my origin story, real quick, I looked this up here in the last couple of days. So it's my own September 11th. It was 9/11, 1983. And I graduated from high school and was into, I'd heard the Sex Pistols and they were fine. Didn't get really in the Ramones and whatever. Wasn't really getting anything. Paid a bunch of money to go to the Forum in LA to see Def Leppard. A girl I was seeing at the time wanted to go see him. So we go down there. We spent a fortune. I'm bumping my head on the rafters. The guy had two arms, which is the only good thing I can say about the band at that time. They're tiny guys to begin with, and they were 1,000 miles away. And I go, this is the most boring thing. It cost a fortune. I said, this just is not my thing. And as luck would have it, about a week later, I had a friend say, hey, there's some bands playing up in San Luis Obispo. You need to come check this out. It's $1 a band. Well, the great thing, it was $5 for 5 bands. One of the bands didn't show up, and they gave us the $1 back. So that was like, and I got into my first mosh pit, my first real mosh pit, my first circle pit, and I was hooked. I'm like, I went out and shaved my head right after that, and I was like, all right, this is what I'm about, because I'm not about standing at the top of the Forum watching Def Leppard 1,400 miles away, down on this stage. I'm about getting on the stage, jumping around with a band, getting in a good mosh pit, and these great, just fast, heavy guitar songs. So there's a watershed moment in my young life. So when you go back to the songs I like the best, those first 3 songs are like Army of the Dead and In the Trenches. Those songs, the way they start out, and it's by design. They start out with some guitar noise and stuff, and then they launch into that fast pace, and the pit starts, and it's just so, like I said, I'm about to turn 60. If a pit was starting out in the street, I'd have to jump in for at least 2 rotations. I don't know how long I'd stay in, but I'd go in for at least 2 rotations.
Don't let your health insurance provider know that. I think, one of the things that one of my blind spots is I don't really know a lot of early punk beyond the big bands that you've mentioned, like the Sex Pistols and Ramones and some of those artists. So I've mostly learned about them by reading. I've read we've got the Neutron Bomb, which is about the LA punk scene in the late 70s. I've read there's a book about the Cleveland punk scene with the Dead Boys and Para Ubu and stuff like that. So actually getting to hear these early bands that were only available on very limited amount of vinyl is actually really eye-opening because of how much diversity there is on this that I was not expecting. You expect the the real fast punk drums, but the way you explained it, that they would start slower to sort of get things like, we're getting ready, everybody get ready, it's going to happen. Now that makes sense when I'm listening to these songs. I'm like, oh, this is like the ramp up. Like everybody's getting ready. They're primed for the pit, and then boom, it kicks in, and then everybody goes for it. As someone who's never been in a pit and
Well, they
terrified
they
to be
used
near
to
one.
allow stage diving somewhere around like 86. They really cracked down on stage diving, but that was so much fun. And you'd get up there and come flying off the stage and dive out into the middle of the pit. It was just fun.
What did you land on though?
Well, on the people.
Heads and
were they
arms.
nice about it, or did they?
Yeah, no, the pits, it's a bonding experience, and people
Okay.
fall down to help them. It's not a fight. People always think, oh, it's violent. It's not violent at all. It's just it's an allegory for life. It's beauty from chaos.
That is a good allegory. Jay, what doesn't work for you on the record or on the compilation?
Well, I mean, I'm not a big hardcore fan, so the stuff where the way I would describe, a lot of time I can't tell what they're saying lyrically either. I mean, just between the production and the delivery style, it's hard to tell. So I can only describe like musically what's going on. So any of the stuff where, the singer and the guitar are doing the exact same thing the whole song, just in general is less compelling to me. And then I guess just the production in some ways. I mean, like I started off saying, I do like the vinyl, sort of overlay of this whole record, but it makes it a little hard to crank it. It's just a little tough on the ears because it's so in that one frequency. So the good thing is it's only 34 minutes, so it's hard to be critical of much of this individually because it just goes by so fast.
That's what we always said. So if you don't like this song, just wait 90 seconds. It'll be over.
Right. Yeah, I think the longest song is what, 3:22?
Yep.
Yeah. Which is I think we all agreed, one of the strongest songs on the record. So
The Flower Leperds are basically a progressive rock band on this record. They have two songs at
they're
over
like
3 minutes.
Genesis.
They're like Genesis of this thing.
Theatrical and
what that whole nardcore, and I know why those guys, and they're not from Oxford. I think they're actually from LA, because a few of these bands are actually from LA. But I think what separated it is they kind of embraced heavy metal as opposed to rebelling against it, because it was punk. It wanted to burn everything that came before it. But the big guitars and stuff, that was a very nardcore kind of this region thing that you didn't get as much of in the other punk scenes. And we were all supposed to hate Led Zeppelin and hate Van Halen, but everybody wanted to be Van Halen. Everybody wanted to be shred like Eddie Van Halen at the end of the day, even though they said that they hated it. So I always just loved the heavy, the big guitars that came out of this genre of punk.
I have to say, that stood out to me too. I didn't mention it when but it is a very competent guitar compilation. Like some cool parts, different, cool riffs, and most of these songs have solos, or at least some notion of a solo.
Right.
Which
quick solos, yes.
Yeah, I don't always think of like punk songs, having guitar solos or prioritizing guitar solos. And even, obviously there's a lot of 3-chord stuff on here, but there's also some intros and transitions and other songs that are more complex than that. So yeah, there's definitely some distinct guitar characteristic about all this that holds together. It's more, I guess, technical than maybe I was expecting.
Yeah,
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
They didn't shy away from the heavy metal influence, but I will tell you, if your hair got long enough that you had to use a comb, all you would hear is, "What's up, hippie? What are you doing here, hippie? Why are you here, hippie?"
Yeah, I'm with you in terms of like a good example is the Grimm song "Old Town Mall," which is only 62 seconds. It's interesting. It's an interesting song. There's a lot of changes that are. It's got a lot of dynamic in that song, but the recording of it is so odd. Like you can hear the drums, and they sort of like bounce between headphones in the stereo spectrum.
Yeah.
But then you can hear there's no bass in that song. Like you can't make out any bass. It's all.
And I think that's one where there's a pop in the record too. Because I have this.
Yes.
What I have too is got the vinyl and and
it's like in the middle of a drum fill. It's like, but you hear that needle skip and then it comes back again.
Yeah.
So yeah, Death of Two Lovers is the first song on side 2, and you can definitely hear that because I've got the same download that you guys have. You can definitely hear the starting up as it starts into the second side of the record.
Oh yeah, it's like somebody was just waiting to drop that needle. It's like, oh, okay, now we're gonna. It's an interesting way I'm assuming that they just didn't have the master tapes and they just went straight off the vinyl. They probably got, if it's anything like most, cheap recordings, not cheap in the sense, I mean, this probably did in a studio, but like they didn't probably keep the tapes themselves. They're probably just left at the studio and somebody taped over them and did something else, so they probably don't exist.
Yeah, and I know that they all they say is that it was released in '84. They don't even have an exact release date. I was trying to look at that prior to this, but I know it was earlier in the year because I turned 20 in April that year, and I know I already had the album by then. So
I definitely feel like the bands that figure out a chorus or something that gives them just a little bit of personality is what makes them stand out if they don't have the guitar player. Like one of the songs I feel like is just sort of standard hardcore or punk or whatever you want to label it as, is like the Mox Nick song, Vicious Cycle. Mm-hmm. He's doing the da 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 da. Like I've heard that rapid fire delivery 100 times in this style. Or the thing with the drums where they're like dum, 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 like I don't know, it must be a marching band thing. I don't know why you would hit the snare that fast, but I assume that they were in marching band and that they probably learned it from that, even if they I don't know if they would admit they were in marching band. But yeah, so it's weird because like I enjoy listening to this almost as if I like I'm watching a documentary, like because I have no clue what's going on, and so I'm like, oh, this is all interesting and stuff, but in terms of what I listen to on a daily basis, it has nothing to do with like what I listen to on a regular basis of music. So it's like a museum artifact in some ways, that because I just didn't live through this. This was not my experience. Yeah. Unlike you, this is like a part of your youth and it has a whole different meaning to you. Whereas I'm like this is like forensic analysis for me. I'm like, oh, that's okay. What's going on with the snare in that song? And is there a snare? Can I hear it?
So when you can pull up the music on your phone and it says has your top 25 most played. My number 1 is Boy Is Life by Dr. No. I've played that more times on my phone than any other song. That Flower by Soundgarden's number 2.
That's wild. And that's and do they actually put out albums, or I noticed a lot of these bands never put out albums. They were either all on 7 inches or just on compilations.
And the cassette thing was getting pretty big at that time. They would hand out cassettes at the show or ask for $1 for a cassette and try to raise a little bit of money at a show. I mean, these guys were San Luis Obispo, because the college was up there, they would put gigs together up there. I was living outside of Santa Maria, which is closer, but they were driving, if you're driving up from Oxnard, it's about 3 hours to get up there. And it was honestly like something from a movie. The whole band and all the equipment are all packed into some van, and sleeping on people's floors, and you take them out and take them to Taco Bell, and they'd be eternally grateful because you fed them and stuff. It was just, they were just touring kids running around touring. It was fun. It was a really fun scene, and it really felt like something that was ours. I'm really glad that you guys see some value in it, because I thought there's a really good chance they're going to go, all right, you're just reliving your youth here because this sucks. but it's got its own, and you've both touched on it. It's got its own unique sound to it. It was something that was happening, and there was an excitement about it. And I know that when we talked about the whole grunge scene and Nirvana and Soundgarden and everything coming out, that I got that same feeling when that all happened. It's like, whoa, there's something really going on here. And nothing since. I don't know if that's because I'm getting older, or music has just gotten too boring, or what, but nothing has really taken over like those two genres did when they came out.
Well, I don't know. I listen to this and I get so much backstory on what we've talked about, like with punk music, with grunge. I can hear where those really early grunge bands were digesting punk and hardcore along with heavy metal and other things, and distilling that down into something unique. And I can hear like, oh, okay, this is where we have touched on a few punk bands, but we haven't really done a lot of punk. We talked about Bad Religion, we've talked about Stanford Prison Experiment, a couple other ones, but we really haven't gotten into a ton of it. And we did an 80s podcast on the Descendants. That's one of the few times that we've actually gotten into. I'm still trying to figure out the difference between what hardcore and punk really is, because it sounds the same, and I don't know that I understand it.
It's as much about style as it is the music, about how you dress and stuff. The hardcore, I mean, Doc Martens, shaved head, leather jacket, flannel tied around your waist, you were a hardcore punk. I mean, that was just what that was. And that was before shaving your head was seen as anything Nazi-ish or racist. None of that stuff was, when I first got into it, none of that stuff was around. There was none of the, I know that Dead Kennedys had the song about, Nazi punks F off, which was about the same time. And I guess I had some of that in the bigger cities and stuff, but there was no racial BS or anything like that. It was just young kids rebelling. And you see the subject matter of a lot of the songs. There's a lot of anti-war stuff. So this is 84, these bands are writing these songs in 82, 83. 1980, Reagan reintroduced the selective service that you had to register for the draft. And, those of us that were in that age range were like, man, we don't want to, we don't want to get drafted and be like, what happened to the generation before us. So I think the subject matter of a lot of these songs is really interesting for the time. I mean, you hear them complaining about Reagan and the Russians and stuff. And it's a time capsule.
I thought I heard Vietnam and Saigon at one point too.
Yep, on Strike Back. Yep.
Ill
Repute. Of all the bands in here, I've probably seen them the most times. They were an Oxnard band for sure, and they used to make the circuit up here, and we'd go up and see them in San Luis Obispo. So I probably saw them a dozen times. They were a great live band. All these bands were really tight, and I've seen a lot of other punk shows, and a lot of times it's just more attitude than anything else. You were talking about New York punk, and a lot of times I always felt like a lot of that was more the attitude and how you looked than how you actually played. And I really think that's why the whole thing of just shaving your head and wearing a flannel came into vogue. It's like, we're just here for the music. I'll tell you what, as far as what everybody was really into that was not regional around here, is everybody loved Minor Threat. Minor Threat was, if you went to these gigs, you'd see all the local shirts, but you saw a lot of Minor Threat shirts. People were really into Minor Threat, and it kind of makes sense because they were that guitar based, kind of straight ahead, no BS, quick punk rock.
Well, and I think you mentioned about the sort of racial component of like skinhead in the US versus, if you think about like UK skinhead is a different thing than a US at this time, because of their, obviously they're coming out of not coming out of, but the difference in the economic issues with the UK that sort of drove punk up, with the Sex Pistols and whatnot, and Sham 69 and all those bands. What I see here is a much more like ethnically diverse. There are a lot of Hispanic members of these bands, which you
That was
which
something I
you
was
would
going to
not
point out.
see
Yeah,
in like New York or
yeah,
other parts of the country.
that's something you definitely will become coming out of Oxnard and Ventura. There's the big farming community, so there's a lot of guys of Mexican heritage in here, and the bass player for I don't remember which band, but he's one that coined the phrase nardcore.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you would. It was very diverse, and like I said, there was never any. In fact, I remember when that thing all started, some local guys started an organization called Sharp Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice.
Okay. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ishmael Hernandez is the one who
Yes.
came up with the term nardcore from the Dr. No guitarist.
And something else has changed in this music scene, though, that when I took my sons a few years back to go see No Effects, and Jello Biafra was the MC for it, which my sons were like, "This guy's an ass." I'm like, yeah, he always was. But when we went to these gigs, there might have been 4 girls there. I mean, it was not, girls did not go to these punk shows. And it's amazing now that you go and there's, 25 or 30 or half females in the audience and they're jumping into the pit and everything. That did not happen in 1984. Trust me.
So were bands like Black Flag and the Dead Kennedys, were they playing this area at all, or did you have to go, if you wanted to see them, did you have to go somewhere else?
Yeah, you just had to go see them. I know that the closest Black Flag got was Santa Barbara, which was less than an hour drive from where I lived, and we were pretty excited about that. But then it got canceled because the word had gotten out that they'd had riots at their last several shows. But Black Flag they did play in San Luis Obispo one time. I didn't see him, but it was like before Henry Rollins was even with the band. But yeah, in general, they seemed to stay. We had to go down there to see him. So like a Black Flag or a Dead Kennedys or bands like that, that's like the Led Zeppelin of this genre. And in fact, there was a lot of the attitude was like, screw those guys. They sold out. They're that's mainstream. Even Suicidal Tendencies, was considered kind of on the mainstream side. We weren't about that. It's like, yeah, whatever. They're half joke band.
Trying to imagine a world where Black Flag on SST Records is mainstream.
That was considered pretty mainstream
in 1983 or 82 compared to what is actually mainstream at the time. That's wild.
Well, you could take your life in your hand just dressing like a punk rocker around here too. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of agriculture, a lot of cowboys and stuff. There was the occasional scrap between guys in cowboy boots and cowboy hats, and those of us with shaved heads and flannels on. And it wasn't, it's cool now, and everybody's really accepting of stuff. But people used to yell things, and we'd be walking down the street, and people would be yelling things at us out of car windows and stuff. It was something different, and people were intimidated by it.
That's wild. That's so weird.
It is weird to think about, but it was a thing.
So let's get into overall rating on this recording. I'll share the poll results from Patreon in a moment, but Jay, where do you land? Worthy album, better EP, or decent single for It Came From Slimey Valley?
I'm going to go with the worthy album because it feels like an artifact that's important to the context of a lot of what we talk about in the 90s podcast. It holds together, like I mentioned earlier, like it a lot of times the compilations, like you can really hear, certain bands are like way different than others. It's hard to get like a really cohesive, but this sounds like very cohesive, with enough variety to keep you interested. So it's short, it's cohesive, and it's, an important statement, I think. It's a lot more nuanced than I thought it would be. And I enjoyed kind of picking apart and kind of tying it back to some other music we've heard and having better context of maybe where some of that came from, and um, something I was totally unaware of. So I think it's a good like discovery listen to just throw the thing on and give it a spin, and it paints a pretty clear and interesting picture. Where'd you land, Tim?
I'm also going to say Worthy Album because I feel like you said, this is like a really unique artifact. I think I do have, favorite songs, and I added the Slaughterhouse-5 song to my like regular driving playlist, which has like 1,000 songs on it. So in a couple weeks that'll pop up and I'll be like, oh, this song. And I can sing along. Second generation youth. Like it's a good hook. I mean, it's a good hook. And I just think like if you are interested in music the way that we are, where you want to learn, you want to get into the nooks and crannies of different scenes and sounds, like this is such an interesting little collection of songs. Like I said, it's not even, we've had a great run of short albums. We did the Hookers album, and that was 29 minutes. And now we get a compilation that's barely over 30 minutes. I'm loving this.
It's like people are listening to them whenever we're critical of albums that are like an hour long.
Right. I need more 1 minute and 9 second songs. I like that length because it's my
I don't
attention
mind long
span is
songs, but get it done in under 40 minutes.
there. You go. Yeah, for the album, yes. But yeah, I absolutely think that if you're into punk in any way, maybe you're a little bit younger than us or our age and you were into like the 90s stuff, maybe you go back into some of the later 80s stuff. I think this is worth checking out just because it's got a distinct sound. It definitely, like, I'm now starting to figure out the difference between like West Coast and East Coast, which is a very 90s rap thing to say, but it's also, I guess, an 80s punk thing to say, to hear the difference between like the Ramones and Dictators and stuff that was happening in New York versus the stuff that's happening, and not just in California, but different parts of California, and how that's separated in terms of style and sound. So yeah, absolutely, people should check this out. So Rudy, this is probably a foregone conclusion, but please share your
Single.
Yeah, no surprises. Yeah, Worthy Album, absolutely. And I'm really gratified that you guys took to it like you did. I'm glad that it's not just my own bias of something that I grew up on. But if people listen to this, if you get a chance to listen to it, just think about the time period. I mean, punk really was it 77, 78 when the Sex Pistols and that whole thing. I mean, this was in the 84. I mean, this is just a few years later. And what was the number one stuff on the regular top 40 radio? These kids were just rebelling against it. I mean, that's why, short songs, fast songs, throw as many hooks in it as you can, speak your mind. Yeah. If everybody else had long hair, we're going to shave our heads. It's just was that great rebellion that you feel when you're that age.
I have to ask you, are you familiar with a Chinese restaurant called Cathay de Grande?
No.
So if you go to like Spotify and look at the bottom where it says like what the label is, it says copyright 2016 Cathay de Grande Hollywood.
Yeah, that's a woman.
So I Googled it, and Cathay de Grande was a Chinese restaurant from 1973 to 1985, and it was, it served Mandarin cuisine, but it also had punk bands.
Yeah, that I just saw a special on that. I think that Cathay de Grande was one of the promoters. I don't know if that was a name, but yeah, there's a great, I just watched it a couple of weeks ago on Netflix. There's a great special, and it's got Johnny Doe from X and a bunch of people, that there were two Chinese restaurants in some area that were always vacant at night, and they started allowing punk bands to play there. And it was really, I can't remember the name of the doc, but it was really interesting.
I'll have to look that up. So it says under notable acts, it says the Red Hot Chili Peppers performed their first show there under the name Tony Flo and the Miraculously Majestic Masters of Mayhem. Other bands that played there: the Minutemen, Bad Religion, Tex and the Horseheads, Dr. No, The Wild, along with regulars from Orange County, Social Distortion, TSOL, The Vandals, Agent Orange, and the Replacements and Butthole Surfers play there while they were on tour. And apparently they got into some issues with neighbors and they had to shut down because of the very loud Chinese restaurant in this particular neighborhood, I guess, angered some of the neighbors. And they get name dropped in a NoFX song called The Desperation's Gone. So I guess it's kind of a, remember, Jay, we were talking about doing a show about these like venues that were legendary and people don't know about them, and we travel around the country like we're Frank and Mike from American Pickers, and visit all these venues and talk to the bands that played there. That didn't happen, unfortunately. Our pitch didn't go to the networks, didn't pick that up, but this would be a perfect example of like, it'd be so cool to know about this restaurant and see the pictures and all the bands that played there and find out if any video exists.
Yeah, there was a good doc that I watched, like I said, just within the last couple of months that I watched, maybe different than that, but it was, there were two Chinese restaurants within proximity to each other. And the lady that ran the one got tired of the band, so they went and played at the other one. It was really interesting doc. It was really tight, but yeah, it had all those same bands that you're talking about. Yeah, the venues were always a challenge. So when the bands would come up here to St. Louis, they'd pay at the at like the IBEW, the electrical workers place. I mean, you'd play in these little tiny venues. There was no big venues with good acoustics or anything. They're playing in Grange halls and stuff like that, or La Casa de la Raza down in Santa Barbara. There were just these little holes in the wall. And it was funny too. Some of the bookings used to get really that we could do a whole show on crazy double bookings where people just said, "Oh, these are loud kids," and they would book like the Mentors. Have you ever heard of the Mentors?
No.
Yeah, well, you have to look them up. They're kind of a sleaze rock. The guy's name is El Duce. They wore these, and they had all these weird songs, but they paired them up with Agent Orange and some other just straight ahead punk bands, and that was one of those dangerous gigs I've ever seen. It got pretty ugly in there. And I remember the promoter saying, "I don't know, they're just loud. I thought they all played the same. They all listened to the same stuff." But you could do a whole program on that.
That's awesome. Hey, the community agreed with us 100% for the album.
Both of the votes?
No, 5. But hey, there were no dissenting votes. That's not bad. I mean, here's the thing. Those were 5 people that probably never heard this before, listened to it and said, "Oh yeah, this is good." So we know Gavin was one of them, but that's pretty awesome that the people are discovering this. And like it was mentioned, some people were talking about it on Discord this week. Compilations are so much fun, especially from the 80s and 90s of punk and underground and emo the emo diaries compilations, and even like the CMJ samplers. There's so many things that went to college radio that we've never heard of, and you go back and you look at these CMJ samplers and you're like, what, who are half these bands? Like, I have no idea what this is. And that's all over the place. There's no particular rhyme or reason other than that just came out that week.
Yeah, we talked about the Fistful of Rock series that last episode with Eric Peterson, which was huge for breaking a lot of those action rock bands from Scandinavia.
We could probably do a whole podcast or a podcast series on just compilation series from different labels and covering different genres, because there's a lot. I don't know if that still happens anymore. It's a shame if it doesn't. Maybe there's like playlists.
Right. Yeah, with playlists have kind of killed the idea, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can't even make, used to be able to make mixtapes and stuff for people. Now you're like, well, I made you a playlist, but it's going to go on shuffle. So it's not really going to be the way that I wanted it to go unless you listen to it in order. And
no, that's, you don't want to sound like the old guys, but this album and some other ones that around that time, they got passed around. They were like gold. It was so fun to turn somebody onto it. And it wasn't a matter of, here, listen to it on my phone. You had to go get a turntable and put it on and sit down and listen to it and analyze the album cover and stuff. It was like finding buried treasure. It was a lot of fun. It's just, there's so much of everything all the time now. I don't think kids today get that experience because you're just bombarded. I mean, it's great. I mean, I've had stuff that I'm in the mood to listen to a song and I'm be sitting at a stoplight and punch it up on my phone and it comes onto my radio. I'm like, who would have thought,
Yeah.
10 or 15 years ago, I was like, oh, I haven't heard that song in a while. And I punch it up and it downloads and plays over my truck speakers within a few seconds. It's great. But, we also used to have to wait to see The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. I mean, we used to plan the evening around watching that on TV, and then now you can just watch it on your phone.
Yeah. So you have a green vinyl copy of this that was from the original pressing?
So my ex-wife,
Uh-oh.
I had a very impressive collection of punk albums that didn't survive the divorce.
She got the records?
I think she gave them away or sold them or something, but
I was going to tell you what this goes for on Discogs, but I guess I won't.
I know what it goes for.
It's not crazy. I mean, it's definitely got value if it's in nice condition, but dang. I got to make sure that I got that stuff locked down in case anything goes wrong.
You got to make sure. No, I had an impressive collection of punk albums. Yeah, there's a few bands that I'm surprised like RKL didn't make it onto this compilation. I don't know what the deal was. There was Rich Kids on LSD. They were out of Santa Barbara. I had several of their albums. That was a fun local band.
Well, thank you for bringing this to us, because there was no way in hell Jay and I were going to find this. I mean, this is they only made up pressed up a few hundred the first time, and there was a repress. It looks like in 1990, and then again in 2008, and then the cassette / digital version on Bandcamp. All those were limited. So I mean, anybody's got any copies of this, they're probably valuable, because there just weren't a lot pressed up, and it's so hard to find any of these bands other than these compilations. So this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed getting to do this and getting a little history from that time period. Want to remind everybody, we have a new podcast that also covers the 80s, but not in the same way. It's called Dig Me Out 80s Metal. I'm sure we'll do a crossover album. There were a lot of bands that started as hardcore and then crossed over into thrash / metal, from what I've read. So we might hit on something that has a connection to either these bands or this scene at some point. But that's our new podcast. We just dropped a new episode on the band Salty Dog, which championed by Chip Midnight, our co-host on that. And you can sign up to get weekly, or not weekly, but regular updates on both Dig Me Out 90s rock and 80s metal at Substack. You can sign up for the newsletter there, and you can read the newsletter at our Patreon at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. It's also where we have our polls, like the ones for this episode, and for our monthly tournaments, where albums get suggested via our website, digmeoutpodcast.com, for either podcast, and we put them in polls and they get voted on. It's also how you get access to our Discord. A lot of stuff, a lot of chatter on the Discord this week. It's been busy talking about various things, including Wendy's attempt to install surge pricing into their lunch menu, which would have caused me to drive the 5 minutes over to Wendy's headquarters, since I'm literally in the same neighborhood as the Wendy's headquarters, and stand outside with a picket sign demanding that they not install or start using surge pricing, because that's ridiculous. I'm not paying $3 more for French fries just because it's 12 o'clock and not 3 o'clock. Let's be realistic here. Jay, is there any food that you would pay surge pricing for? Surge prices? Maybe
There's some barbecue.
some brisket down there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the way that barbecue works, though. Like they only make so much, and when it's gone, it's gone. So you sort
Yeah,
of
but that's not dynamic pricing. That's not like you're here at this time, we're going to charge you this much. Like there's a menu and then there's a dollar
well,
amount.
they do market pricing.
Well, market pricing, yes, I understand that's always existed, but not for your entire menu, right?
Yeah, for certain things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. Anyway,
Are you communist?
no, Jay,
I mean, you do know you don't have to go to Wendy's.
They just
know,
opened
but
a Wendy's. They just opened a Wendy's in my town.
They have the Baconator.
Oh my
though.
gosh. In Ohio, they're like every corner. You
Yeah.
can't. You throw a rock, you hit a Wendy's.
I don't think I've eaten fast food except for In-N-Out in the last 5 years. You guys don't have In-N-Out back there.
No, we just got up here. We just got a Texas taco chain called Torchy's Tacos. That's really good. But I mean,
you guys do not have good tacos there. Trust me. I come from the land of good tacos.
no, I've eaten Mission style tacos in California, and I know how good they are. You'd be surprised. We do have some good food here. I mean, Jay knows like our barbecue doesn't compare to Texas barbecue, but we do have some good joints up here, but they're not that level.
Columbus is a good, like, sort of like averages out all the best things and does a decent job of replicating them.
It's because half the people aren't
terms of
from
food.
here. Like, this is such a transient city. So many people come to go to college here, and then they
It's
end up
also
staying.
the test market capital of America.
Yes,
It's where like they test new concepts for restaurants. 'Cause it's
usually
so, like,
fast
middle,
food.
It's
Usually
so
we
middle of the country.
right. We get the weird fast food things that people are like, "What are you eating? We don't have that." I'm like, "Yeah, it's because we're being tested on."
We'll let you know if it works out.
Make
Yeah.
pizza.
It's either going to work out or this is going to give me really bad indigestion.
You left off the best thing going on in Discord right now.
What's the best thing?
Me trolling Pearl Jam fans.
Oh, you really love trolling Pearl Jam fans.
I haven't been on there. What's that all about?
Well, they put out a new single and they've hyped it up as being like a return to
Return to mediocrity. What?
to their harder rocking roots.
Well, to their, we had just done 10 a couple months ago, so I'm like reminded of like, oh, this band used to sound like something unique and like they had an identity and they did their thing, and then they released this new song, which they put out a record every couple of years now. Yeah, there's all this hype of like, oh, we're going back to the
And Mike McCready was talking about how much guitar
original sound. I'm like, I put it on. It's like, this could be any band. I don't like, there's nothing about this that says it's Pearl Jam other than the singer sounds a little bit like Eddie Vedder.
I used your line, by the way, that this could be any band.
Yeah.
When I was talking to Keith, our friend Keith, and some of his Pearl Jam friends, and they did not care for that. You're like, that's clearly Matt Cameron playing drums, and that's Mike McCready's guitar. I was like,
No.
I stepped on the hornet's nest there. I tried to stir shit, and it came back at me. It was.
Pearl Jam fans can be fairly humorless about their band.
Yeah. That's what I found out in the Discord.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are taken very seriously, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, even you and I disagree about what albums we like, but
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I don't take it like I recognize that basically after the 90s, I'm done with them.
Yeah.
But
they haven't been good. They haven't been good since they changed their name from Mookie Blaylock.
We understand you come down on the Soundgarden side of things when it comes to the Seattle scene. That's fine. That's totally fine. Thanks once again, Rudy, for bringing this to us and being a part of the union. And lastly, if you want to leave some positive feedback, our listeners, we would greatly appreciate it. You can do that at Apple Podcasts. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.